has a few short moments of shock, if you will, where whatever happens, it takes time to sink in and to react to. And normally you're so involved with trying to rectify whatever situation you find yourself in that you really don't too much think about the consequences at the time. It's normally after the fact that you get to sit down and really think about what did happen.
You end up trembling afterward.
Particularly if you've broken something and you have to go face the boss.
That was astronaut lunar module pilot Fred Hayes, who even now is in the Aquarius lunar module with both vehicles docked. Let's see if we can get that lined up right. We really ought to know how to do this kind of thing better after all these years. Both vehicles are docked at a position some 214,000 miles from Earth, about 26,000 miles from the moon, from the lunar landing that should have been their target if all had gone well. And a few moments from now, about 10 or 15 minutes from now, if we calculate correctly, they'll do a small burn of this engine, the Descent Propulsion System engine of the LEM. Since they can't use this engine, the Service Propulsion System engine of the command module, it has no electrical power, they'll do a small burn of this engine. The SPS engine is disabled, as it were. A 16-foot per second burn that will round out their orbit. Instead of their looping high out far away from the moon, perhaps never to make it back, that burn is intended to put them into a free return trajectory, a burn of some 60 nautical miles around the moon that will automatically get them back to Earth this Friday. They'll be gliding back, as it were, with no extra power needed. And provided the oxygen supply aboard the lunar module holds out, remember they've lost a lot of the oxygen supply aboard the Odyssey command module. Provided the oxygen supply holds out aboard the Aquarius lunar module, they should make it back to Earth safely sometime Friday afternoon, shortly after 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. ABC correspondent Jim Burns, also manning the guns, as it were, here in our ABC Space Center. Jim?
Well, Jules, I was rudely awakened, like a lot of other Americans, I imagine will be, just about 2 hours ago in Connecticut after having come back from Houston. And I was appalled to hear that they had this kind of problem. I tried to pick up the ABC radio on the way in the car and heard Red Muller and some people talking, and they gave me a fairly clear idea of what's going on. But let's assume that somebody is just waking up now and they're getting ready to go to work and they turn the radio on. Can you give us in capsule summary, give me in capsule summary, what has happened up here?
Okay, I think we can do that, Jim. At around 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, some 5 hours and 20 minutes ago, though it seems like 50 years ago, Jim, Fred Hayes and Jim Lovell, I crossed Jim Lovell's name with yours, were crawling back into the Odyssey command module after having tested out the helium system aboard the Aquarius lunar module, which was working perfectly. They had barely gotten back into the command module when they heard what Jim Lovell called a loud bang. 2 of the 3 fuel cells that supply the basic electrical power for the command module failed. The gauges went zilch, down to 0, or zip as somebody called it. Simultaneously, they began losing oxygen supply, which is still unexplained, but apparently a meteoroid or an explosion. A meteoroid hit the service module. We'll show that again, I think it's useful. The service module back there, that's the tank truck for the command module where the men are up here. In here are spherical fuel tanks, spherical oxygen containers. This is all the goodies that keep you going, the consumables, as they call it in spaceflight. Either an explosion took place in here or a meteorite came zapping through and punctured the thin aluminum skin of the service module and blew up one of those tanks. And in fact, in blowing up one of the fuel cell fuel tanks, apparently also damaged and caused a leak in one of the oxygen tanks, or ruptured a line. We'll never know, since this vehicle never gets back to Earth. It burns up. Okay, very rapidly the electrical power began failing, the oxygen supply began bleeding out of the command module, and an all-out emergency was declared. Any idea of a lunar flight, a lunar landing as originally intended in the Frau Maro area of the moon was immediately abandoned. The issue then was to save the lives of all 3 men. They were ordered to get in the lunar module, which is not here, it's over here. They were ordered to get into Aquarius, their lunar module, which, of course, the 2 vehicles had docked, but our 2 models aren't docking too well tonight. They were ordered to get into the Aquarius lunar module and power up its system, and indeed, that's what Jim Lovell who is in this area, the commander's left seat area of the lunar module. That's where he is now, and Fred Hayes is in the right area here. Both those men are in there now. They've got the lunar module working fine. Its engine seems to be working fine. The situation stabilized. Jack Swigert, the command module pilot, stayed in the Odyssey command module. The tunnel between both vehicles, there's the tunnel area of the LEM, is open. In fact, the LEM's oxygen is keeping Jack in the command module here alive. But the command module's oxygen purification system has taken the carbon dioxide out of the air because the LEM system isn't yet working. They didn't have time to power it up. Now, the issue then was what to do to get them headed back toward Earth, because the service propulsion system engine, like here, is crippled. It can't be ignited. So the LEM's descent engine system that should have landed them on the moon is being utilized as an insurance engine. It's going to do a small burn in a few minutes and round out this crazy hybrid orbit they were in that would have given them better lunar lighting and a better arrival time. It's going to round it out and put them into what I call a Frank Borman style free return trajectory orbit, and it will glide them back to Earth, Jim.
Jules, what would you guess it was like in that capsule when that thing took place, whatever it was, when that loud noise took place? What actually happened? Did the lights suddenly go out? Things started...
Oh, the master, we know a little bit. I heard Jim Lovell say the whole thing has gone crazy. The master alarm system lit up like a Christmas tree, red lights, yellow lights, warning lights, and things like that. They knew they were in deep trouble almost instinctively. And then by punching up other things in the computer, they could read out the fuel cells and electrical power and oxygen, and that's when they knew the ball game was over. The issue then was if you were in a jet airplane, eject as fast as you can. But as Bob Braun noted earlier, even though things happen just as fast in a spacecraft, you can't get back as fast as you can by ejecting from an aircraft. You're stuck in the vehicle.
Or was there a mad scramble to get into the LEM then?
Oh, no, they stayed there, and Mission Control in Houston, of course, which has telemetry, that in point of fact shows them the same things the guys read on the gauges inside the command module Aquarius. Mission Control knew instantly what was happening and told them, and they cross-corroborated one another's instrument readings, if you were. But within half an hour, it was obvious all command module electricity was being lost. And Jack Lausma, who was the Capcom on orders from the flight director, said, get out of there, you've only got 15 minutes of juice left, and get into the lunar module. Power it up to save the command module systems, because this baby is the only one that can get you back to Earth alive. The lunar module is never intended to land on Earth. It's a fragile aluminum vehicle.
Well,
it'll burn up.
One of the things that confuses me, Jules, they have to come back through the atmosphere in the command module, obviously, but you were saying before that the bulk oxygen supply now is coming from LEM, right? Into the module?
Right.
All right. If it's coming from there, and yet they have to jettison LEM before they come back into Earth, what do they do about oxygen for that?
I should have explained that. Okay, remember now, both vehicles are docked together, and they'll continue to stay docked almost until reaching the Earth. All right. The one significant thing, and Jim Lovell and Fred Hayes and Swigert were all cool cookies, and they saved their own lives with one instinctive act. They immediately pressurized what are called the surge and emergency oxygen tanks aboard the command module. That's the get-me-home oxygen. Without it, I'm dead. With it, I've got enough oxygen for 6 or 7 hours of flight to re-enter in. So they'll fly along this way until shortly before re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, then transfer out of the LEM, jettison the LEM. It's done its job, but it will save their lives at that point. They'll jettison the service module, which is useless to them, and re-enter a conventional Apollo moon-Earth re-entry type thing. Re-enter over the Pacific, we hope, though the issue still is not resolved, and hopefully come down to a safe landing. We've gotten word from Mission Control that it's about 15 minutes away from the small burn of the...
How critical is that burn going to be, Jules? Is it absolutely essential that they get into that 60-mile orbit?
Oh, yes. Otherwise, they'd be so far out, they'd run out of oxygen before anything else could be done. And the reason it's being done now, shortly before you came in while you were racing on the Parkway to get here, Jim, the original intent was to do it tomorrow night. But here's what happened. And Chris Kraft believes in conservative, real-time flight planning. And he's got some marvelous troops down there in Mission Control who know that game. They were supposed to do that burn at 9:30 tomorrow night. But how long will my systems hold up? supposing we begin to lose more oxygen. This, as I call it, is the get me home burn. By doing it now, I guarantee I'm going to get back no matter what happens. There's no chance for anything else to fail. That's why you want to do it now before any further emergency can develop.
In other words, if there's success in this burn, it's going to get out of the moon's gravitational field, and it's going to come back on that trajectory toward Earth.
Right.
That doesn't mean they're safe, however, does it? The
No,
mere
they
fact
could
that they're
still
on-
run out of oxygen.
Is that the main problem right now? Is that the big hazard that remains in this mission, is the supply of oxygen?
There are two big hazards. First of all, the LEM's descent propulsion system engine must work. Well, all indications are from the spacecraft, and we're hearing it on air to ground from Lovell and Hayes, are that the engine's in a go condition, and it most likely will work. Once that works, once they get into a new orbit and head back toward Earth, their 1.5 remaining problems are enough oxygen and electrical power. Now, Jim McDivitt, the Apollo program manager, former astronaut Jim McDivitt, seemed confident they'd have enough juice or electrical power because the LEM, as you may recall, has some 60 to 70 hours of battery life left. There apparently is, I shouldn't say actually, we don't know this, there is apparently a little bit of battery life left in one fuel cell of the command module, and most important, its reentry batteries. You've got to have those batteries to use your reentry control.